Hello, welcome back to the Thought Leader Recruitment Podcast. I'm Sam Bylett. Today, I'm joined by Michael Ashley Bearden, VP of Recruiting at Talented Team. Michael Ashley, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Can you kick us off by telling us what your business is all about and how the fractional recruitment model actually works compared to traditional search?
Yeah, so Talented Team offers fractional. It's HR services, people operations services, as well as recruiting. And so basically it just means we plug in as on-demand talent partners, and that's on anything from talent strategy, covering for folks that are out of office. And then also on the recruiting side, we're unlike traditional search firms in that we don't work on a contingency basis. We don't work on a retained basis to have fixed scopes and high fees. So our model is hourly, it's flexible, and we're deeply embedded with our clients. And so we act as an extension of their team, whether they need 10 hours a week or, full-time coverage for months. And that flexibility really allows us to meet clients where they're at. So we can help them meet them where they are. And we help early stage companies, we help smaller companies, startups, nonprofits, and teams that are scaling, that just got funding, and help them with the strategic support they need without the rigidity or price tag of the traditional models.
Yeah, excellent. And what made you move from a big company talent acquisition to building an hourly on-demand recruiting service?
Yeah, so I spent years in fast-growing startups, corporate TA, large organizations. I helped scale a company from 15 to 150 in a couple of years, and I really love building. And so, I also saw from my time in executive search firms how rigid traditional hiring models can be. So, whether it was search firms charging massive fees or internal teams that, were ultimately stretched too thin, I was really drawn to the idea of making recruiting more human, more flexible, and more aligned with, the needs of the business. It wasn't really about trying to maximize my commissions or my company's commissions. When working on the search, it was really about aligning with the clients and making sure that we were providing the best service possible. And so, the fractional model ultimately provides greater flexibility and the opportunity to bring strategic insight and focus on long-term fit rather than just, kind of filling seats. And so to me, it feels more collaborative. I'm also helping to build a new line of business for Talented Team. And so, I'm helping to build that out internally, to bring a new service to market for the organization. That feels super exciting to me as well.
Yeah, sure. And who's turning to the fractional model right now, and what kind of hiring challenges usually bring them to your door?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing three main types of organizations, and this isn't all inclusive, of course, but we're working a lot with founder-led startups. So folks that don't necessarily have an internal people team or an internal recruiting team yet. They know how important hiring is. They know it's make or break, but they're not ready to hire a full-time internal recruiter, or, they're not interested in paying $40K plus for a contingent fee, or, $75 to $100K for a retained fee. And so, they need somebody strategic that can jump in quickly and help them run a process when, they just don't have the time or the capacity to do so. Number two, we also work a lot with nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. Folks that may or may not have an internal HR people function, but they definitely don't have recruiting capacity, and so they're navigating really tight budgets. They've got big missions, and they need somebody who understands how to attract aligned, mission-aligned, and values-aligned talent, even in competitive markets. And so, I'm really proud that we've been able to work with a number of nonprofits to help them acquire mission critical folks, for, a third of what a contingent firm would have cost them to bring on. And then the third group, I'd say, is post Series A and B tech companies. So folks that are scaling fast, like they're hiring volume despite they're not necessarily ready to build out a full internal TA team. And they just need an embedded partner who can keep the quality high without putting all that burden on their managers to do, all the hiring, all the screening, all the scheduling, making offers, all that good stuff. And I'd say, across those three, there's pretty consistent pain points that they're experiencing. One, they're stretched thin, they're under-resourced. They just don't have the capacity to be able to take on the additional job of talent acquisition and recruiting in addition to everything they already have going on. They've tried, just post and pray, posting a job, getting 100 applicants and just having, very, very low quality and nobody really hitting the bill for what they need. They want help designing the process and not just filling the seats. So really being thoughtful around, cool, like what can our interview process look like? How can we ensure a great candidate experience? How can we make sure that we're asking the questions that are going to get us the information that we need to make, really solid hires? And then they're also looking for somebody that feels like a partner, a teammate, and not just, kind of a black box agency that, that's working on 10 of the same roles at the same time with, similar clients and isn't really, solely focused on them for that.
Yeah, it makes sense. And if a company is exploring fractional recruiting for the first time, what do they need to have in place to make that partnership successful?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's the most successful engagements that we have. I'd say start with a clarity on priorities and alignment on, just exactly what it is that we're there to do and what we're looking for. And so, they don't necessarily have to have everything figured out, but we can absolutely help shape that process. But having alignment on what the most critical things are, what great looks like, consensus across the team that everyone is looking for the same things. I can tell you there's been a number of times when I've been both in-house and external working on roles where, we would get to the interview process and somebody would be like, oh, I don't even know that we need this position, and stuff like that coming up. So I'd say that just having clarity, alignment from everybody that's involved with the process is going to be a big part of that. It also really helps if people are committed to the collaborative effort of this. So, fractional, like we can handle a lot. We can take a lot of the burden off of, a lot of the administration off of the hiring team, the client. But, it also doesn't mean completely hands off. And so it works better when there's a clear internal point of contact. When there's timely feedback, when there's openness, iteration, we can move fast, but it's a partnership, right? It's not just here, you go do this thing now. And then, I'd say another piece is being able to share the story. So why would somebody want to join the team? Like what makes this mission meaningful? What makes your culture unique? The more that we can understand that and really communicate that to folks, the more powerful the work becomes, and the more powerful the story is, and the better folks that we can get engaged.
Yeah, it makes sense. We all know there's a competitive market out there at the moment. And what are a couple of your kind of go-to tactics for helping candidates stand out in this competitive market?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you asked that, and it's not, and I think it fits nicely into what makes fractional great. They're not really, they're not like my candidates, right? Like we're in partnership with fractional. And so like there are candidates. And so, fractional, again, it really aligns in all the ways that we need to be to ensure a really successful partnership, to make sure that we're getting the absolute right person for the role. And ultimately with fractional, like it doesn't matter if we source the candidate, if the candidate applies to, a post that we have up, if they're referred by somebody internal with the organization, like we're making sure that our clients are getting the widest view possible on all the potential hires. And that's a good thing. I've worked with firms on the retained side where, they don't want clients to post that the role is open, right? Like they want exclusivity on it. Like they have carve outs in the contract, which basically say that, if any of these people are hired, like, the firm doesn't get their full fee for that. But anybody that's not on that list, the firm is still getting their full fee. And so, we don't do any of that. There are no carve outs. Like we want the best person for the job, period. And it doesn't really matter where they come from. Like we're going to do all of the things that we can to get the best person. And ultimately, I think that's a win for the clients, in that, it's not like, oh, if you hire these people, we don't get our full fee. Like that's just not how it works with fractional. And so I think that's one of the beauties of the model, is that, it's the best person for the role, no matter where they come from. Like we're helping to get that person through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I recently saw a stat the other day saying 77% of employers say they still can't find good candidates. In your view, is there a talent shortage, or are companies just not looking in the right places?
Yeah, I mean, there's some nuance here. I think it's easy to point to a talent shortage, but more often than not, I'd say there's some degree of an alignment problem here. And that's between how companies define success, what they're looking for in a single candidate, what they're offering, and how they show up in the talent market. And so, I don't think it's purely a supply issue. We work with great people every day. And, some of the things that I've seen are sometimes there's an overly rigid overly rigid desire for what exists within a single candidate. I mean, in the recruiting world, they talk about unicorns, they talk about purple squirrels, like, those terms exist because of people that want everything within a single person, right? And I can point to examples here of in-house roles where I've had where, we were looking for full stack engineers. And that's not to say that they don't exist. And like one is typically more strong than the other, right? Like you typically have back-end engineers that have some front-end experience, or you have front-end engineers that have some back-end experience, but like to have an expert in both of those things is really hard to do, just because like, each one of those things is, a career's worth of work on its own. Right. And so I think that's a part of it as well. And then, there's also people aren't being competitive with compensation in some instances. Like, again, they're expecting the world and, not offering the compensation to pay for both of those skills or all of those skills. And, in many cases, you have people that are clients and organizations that are just using the same tactics that they used 5 years ago, 10 years ago. They haven't updated their, kind of methods. They haven't updated their channels. They haven't updated their messaging. They haven't updated their evaluation criteria. So all of those things are, a little bit, could be improved to help folks, kind of get over that shortage. And then also, I think looking for people kind of outside of the normal channels, right? So I'll point to a role here where, I was at a company, we were recruiting for, it was a junior software engineer. And we had 3 types of profiles. One was computer science grad from, good school. One was they went to a software development boot camp. And one was a self-taught, completely self-taught engineer. And we ended up hiring the self-taught person because they had like the most, kind of drive and enthusiasm for what they were doing. Like it was something that they did on the side, on their own. They taught themselves all these things, like they were curious. And so, if you're looking at huge tech companies, Meta, Google, like they don't hire that sort of profile, right? Like they go for the top computer science program graduates. And, we found, at least for us in that instance, that wasn't the profile that was ultimately best for us. And so I think looking outside of, kind of traditional areas can also be really helpful. Yeah. And so, and I'd say with us, talented team, Fractional generally, we also help clients reframe what they're looking for. And, sometimes that adjusts the role scope. Sometimes that takes a must-have to a nice-to-have, broadening where we search. And again, it goes to non-traditional channels and looking outside of like, the very, very narrow frame that you've been looking at for the past decade on how you're bringing in folks. And so, I'd say that's really one of the magic parts of thoughtful and strategic recruiting and sourcing.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much headhunting is actually happening right now? Are you seeing companies trying to outbid each other to land the talent?
Yeah, I mean, direct headhunting is very, very core to what we do. I think there's a lot of organizations out there that are still just posting and hoping that folks come in like that. They're processing inbound applications, and I call that hiring versus recruiting. Recruiting is where you're building up your employer brand. You're actually, kind of putting in work to communicate the value proposition from yourself and from your organization as an employer. And so, there's research out there, and I read a study earlier this year, and it was basically that sourced candidates are 5 times more likely to accept a job than, folks that apply to a career site. It's usually because people that are applying for multiple jobs, like they don't necessarily have any allegiance to your company at all. And sourced candidates are usually passive. They're not actively interviewing. They don't have as many opportunities. And so there's more focus, and more interest in the opportunity that you're presenting to them themselves. And so oftentimes the best candidates aren't necessarily actively job seeking. And so the only way to engage those folks is to reach out to them directly, present the opportunity to them. And so, passive outreach and direct headhunting is huge. And I mean, you can look at, there was an article earlier this week, late last week, about Meta offering $100 million pay packages to OpenAI engineers. Right? And so, there is still compensation one-upmanship between competitors. It's not as intense as it was, I think, 2020, 2021, early 2022. I think that's kind of tailed off a little bit, but I can point to a client that we're working with right now that if a client made an offer to a candidate, that candidate had multiple competing offers. And so it's certainly still happening. I don't think it's as prevalent or as intense as it was a few years ago, but yeah, it's definitely still very real. And so, folks have to be considerate and thoughtful with, offers that they're making and still be really competitive, because there are other people out there that, that are going after really good candidates.
Yeah, for sure. And if you were to look ahead, say 3 to 5 years time, what big shifts do you think will reshape how recruiting works?
Yeah. I mean, I think it'll be a lot more personalized. I think folks are quicker to drop from processes that are what I would call traditional. It's like you don't hear back for weeks after an interview. You don't ever get any sort of constructive feedback. Like you don't get, any sort of insight into, why or why not things are moving forward. Like the black box of, the interview process and of recruiting and hiring, I think just isn't really going to work for people anymore. And organizations that continue to do those practices are going to be, they're going to be at a loss for folks that, they're just not bringing in who they want to because they don't have a good process. And so candidate experience is going to be increasingly important, especially as AI becomes more prevalent of just having more personalization, like actually having that human touch. Like people still want to deal with people and be treated like humans. And so I think that's going to be of increasing importance as things continue to accelerate on the technology front.
Yeah, sure. And are you using much AI in your own processes? And where do you see the biggest upside for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, we do use some AI within our sourcing tools, and so I'd say stuff that AI is really good at right now is helping with like some automation. So coming up with like drip and nurture campaigns for candidates where you don't have to have somebody in your CRM and put a reminder to reach out. Like you can actually, put in specific tailored messages to them and then have those delivered at a specific cadence, kind of whatever you want within that. And so that's a big piece. I'd say definitely within like the scheduling coordination side and just, taking the burden off of that, like the back and forth, when are you available? Like having things like, and it's not even AI necessarily, but just like Calendly, for instance, there's ATSs like Greenhouse has, a scheduling tool in there. Lever has a scheduling tool in there. And so there's certainly improvements that we've seen in there that we're using. There is profile matching as well in some of these sourcing tools that, can surface candidates for you that you don't necessarily have to look at a profile, put them in queue. There's already like, hey, here's 10 new profiles for you to look at today. So that's been pretty helpful. And then I'd say those are kind of the big ones so far. I'd say also, AI has been helpful with, job description creation, helping to write job descriptions. And the guidance here, and at least what my experience has been, is like, you can use that to get started. And then from there, you take that and then you do whatever you want to do with it. It's like not just, hey, put the thing in and then, take the output and there you go. Like there's still a lot of need for human in the loop stuff here. And I think there will be for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, it's getting that right balance, right, isn't it, between the AI and the human? If you crack that, I think you're definitely going to be winning for sure. And just to wrap things up, is there any kind of exciting anything happening with Talented Team? Any new markets you're looking to go into, or any exciting news in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, we're excited to, we've been historically Talented Team was, like I said, people operations, HR services, and our recruiting business is less than a year old at this point. And so there's a lot of excitement around how we're going to integrate that with the rest of the organization, how we're going to better serve our clients in relation to, talent acquisition and recruiting. I'd say from a market standpoint, it's kind of the companies that I mentioned. I mean, that's our sweet spot. It's really, earlier stage companies that are growing and that, don't necessarily have a need for a full-time person at this point. And that's one of the things that, we've seen is, companies will have, hey, we need to make 6 hires in the next couple months. And then after that, they don't have anything, for a while. And so we're really able to help out a lot on that front. As far as kind of like promotions go, I mean, we're gonna start offering a free kind of hiring process audit and, working with folks to see like what your hiring process look like, what is your employer brand, all that good stuff, and helping folks kind of do a deep dive into, what that looks like from an external standpoint. And then we're also going to offer some free searches for some folks in Q3 and then Q4 as well, just to get a little bit of just to get out there and show folks what we can do. And so excited about that. We're picking up new clients and new searches all the time, industries. I mean, that's another really fun part, is that, we're pretty industry agnostic. And, we work with nonprofit, construction companies, technology companies, retail companies. Just picked up something with, Fractional CFO firm. Just picked up something with a large industrial equipment organization. And so, I think that's going to be a really exciting part, is just continuing to expand the types of organizations that we're working with across different industries. And then, a bunch of different roles too. So, we're working on anything from like an SDR at a tech company to a COO at, the industrial manufacturing company that I mentioned. And so I think just, more clients, more searches, more exposure to a bunch of different industries, and, helping folks bring really awesome people on board is what I'm most excited about.
Good stuff. And for our audience, how can they find out a bit more about Talented Team and connect with yourself?
Yeah, so talentedteam.com is our website, and we've got information up there as far as kind of all the HR, people ops services and recruiting. If people want to find out more about me, I'm on LinkedIn, and so would encourage people to reach out, and I'm always happy to network and connect with folks. Even if it's not necessarily like directly related to searches and all that good stuff, but just I love people, love meeting people, talking to people, all that good stuff. So
amazing. Thank you so much, Ashley. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate your time today. And hopefully speak to you soon.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate you.
No worries.